We'll now look at some examples for truth tables. Our first example asks us to construct a truth table for P and not Q in parentheses or R. Keep in mind that on this particular problem we have 3 events. When a compound statement consists of 3 simple statements, there are 8 different true-false possibilities. So as we begin, we're going to begin by making a column for the P, the Q, and the R. And we're going to keep in mind that there will be 8 different possibilities in each column. To begin the truth table, we're going to write 4 T's and 4 F's in the first column. Under the second column, we're going to do pairs of T's alternating with pairs of F's. So we'll have true, true, false, false, true, true, false, false. And in the third column, we'll alternate true and false all the way down the column. So we'll have true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false. Now obviously this technique is not the only way of listing the 8 possible cases, but this does ensure that all of our cases are unique and that no cases are omitted by mistake. We'll then extend our truth table and write down the problem. So in parentheses we have P and the negation of Q, close the parenthesis, or R. Now to begin, we're going to copy. We're going to copy the P column, the Q column, and the R column. So here's the P column. We're going to copy it underneath the P over here. So again, remember 4 T's and 4 F's. Our Q column, we're going to copy under the Q. So pairs of T's, pairs of F's. A pair of T's, a pair of F's. And here's our R column. We're going to copy that underneath the R over here. So we're going to alternate true and false all the way down. We're then going to start working inside the parenthesis. So the first thing that we have is the negation of Q. So remember that is the opposite of whatever Q is. So in the first row, Q is T, the negation will be false. In the second row, we also have a T under the Q, the negation will be false. These 2 falses will negate to trues. These 2 trues will become falses. And finally, the last 2 falses will become trues. So we're now going to look at the P column and the negation column. So this one and this one. And we're going to do an and in between. So true and false will be false. True and false will be false. True and true will be true. True and true will be true. False and false will be false. False and false will be false. False and true will be false. And false and true will be false. So I'm going to go ahead and circle this because this is the answer to the parenthesis part of the problem. We're now going to combine the part that I circled with the R. And keep in mind that in between we have an OR. So if the first one is false or the second one is true, that is going to be a true. If both the first one and the second one, if we have false or false, that's going to be false. True or true makes a true. True or false makes a true. False or true makes a true. False or false makes a false. False or true makes a true. And false or false makes a false. And so our final answer for our truth table will be this column that we're circling in red. Okay, let's move on to another example. Our next example says that we want to write a statement in symbolic form and construct a truth table. Apples are a good source of fiber, and oranges are a good source of vitamin C. So what we're going to let happen is we're going to take the first part of this statement, apples are a good source of fiber, and we're going to let that be our P. And then we're going to take the second part of our statement, oranges are a good source of vitamin C, and we're going to let that be Q, just to assign some letters to what we're looking at. And so in symbolic form, we are looking for P and, so we'll use our symbol for and, Q. And so we need to do a truth table to determine what P and Q is. And so I'll begin with two columns, one for P and one for Q. Remember that we have four options, true, true, false, false for the P. And then we alternate true, false for the Q. Then we will extend our table and write down what we're looking for, P and Q. And we begin by copying. So we copy the P underneath the P in the answer. So true, true, false, false. And we copy the Q column over here, true, false, false. And then we're ready to do the and. So if P is true and Q is true, then the combined statement is also true. If P is true and Q is false, the combined statement is false. If P is false and Q is true, the combined statement is false. And if P is false and Q is false, the combined statement is false. And so this is the answer to our truth table, and we can see that it's only true in case 1. Our next example says to determine the truth value of the statement P and not Q or R, assuming P is true, Q is false, and R is true. So what we need to do is we need to take our statement here and rewrite it in terms of true and false. So I'm going to open my parenthesis. We know that P is true, so the first P I'm going to write as a T. We have our and statement. Okay, let's look at the negation of Q. Q is false, so the negation of that would be true. Then we have or, R, and R we know is true. Now, inside the parenthesis, if the first statement is true and the second statement is true, the combined statement is also true. Now I'm going to just rewrite the rest. Let's look at it again. If the first statement is true or the second statement is true, the combined statement is true. So the truth value of our statement is that it's true. And look at one more example like that. Determine the truth value of the statement, and the statement remains the same. In parentheses, P and, not Q, and then outside of the parentheses, or R. But this time we have different assumptions. We are assuming P is false, Q is true, and R is true. So let's do the same thing. Let's rewrite it with the T or the F. So we begin with P. We know that P is false. We have our symbol for and. We need the negation of Q. We know that Q is true, so the negation would be false. And we'll close our parenthesis. We'll do our symbol for or, and we know that R is true. Let's look inside the parenthesis first. If the first statement is false and the second statement is false, we know that the combined statement is false. And I'm going to rewrite the rest. Let's look again. If the first statement is false or the second statement is true, we know the combined statement is true. And so the truth value of this statement is true.